Hello there, FFTCG community. I'm Judge Jared, and you are watching episode number 24 of Rules Roundup, the series where I go over rules questions that were asked in the unofficial global FFTCG Discord server and go over the answers to those questions, as well as diving into the rulings and interactions behind that so that you can better understand how we came to those conclusions on what the rulings are, and perhaps test yourself even a little bit on kind of what your rules knowledge is, and if you would have been able to adequately explain that to somebody else if you were handling the rules question, whether it was at the table between you and your opponent, or if you were judging, or just for funsies watching somebody else's match. So anyway, that's what we're here to do. We're in a little bit of a quiet period right now, I think, in FFTCG. We're starting to get some spoilers for Opus 27, but they've been kind of slowly coming in. Not as much community spoilers coming out quite yet. On top of that, the organized play season for 2025 has ended in North America since we had the LCQ and Nationals about 3 weeks ago. So unless you're one of the 12 players who's on the Worlds team for North America, then your season is done. So things a little bit quieter there for a lot of people. No events coming up or anything, and we're just kind of waiting for more spoilers to come in. So I think there's a little bit of a lull, although we did get the new starter decks that came out a couple weeks ago at this point. But there's still plenty to talk about today. So there is a little bit less questions than usual today, because of the reasons that I mentioned. But there's still plenty to talk about, and you'll find out why in a second. But yeah, if you want to join us over on that Discord where these questions are from, then you can find it right over there. Is that Discord, the invite link. And yeah, you can join us in the conversation or lurk like I did when I first joined it years ago. But yeah, that's where we're at. Anyway, what we need to start off with today, for those of you who have good memories and been paying attention, is that we have a cliffhanger. Not from last episode. No, not from episode 23. We have a cliffhanger from episode number 22 that I was supposed to come back to in episode 23, and I didn't because I totally forgot to come back to it. But I didn't forget this time. We're going back to it now. So I'm going to set the stage here for our cliffhanger. This is going to be a previously on Rules Roundup. We had this question. I'm not going to go over all this question because not all the question was important to this. We actually did resolve most of what's written here on this question. But what we didn't resolve was the final bit. And so just a recap here, the question was that lightning has this field ability that says when lightning forming a party deals damage to your opponent, the damage becomes 2 instead. So there's a replacement effect that makes it so that if she's in a party and deals damage, it deals 2 damage instead of the 1 that it normally would have dealt. Then we have the Cu Sith summon, which you can cast on your opponent's forward. And its second effect there says choosing a forward opponent controls. If it deals damage to you or a forward this turn, the damage becomes 0 instead. So we now have a different replacement effect going on there. And so if you cast that onto lightning or onto one of the party members of whoever's party with lightning, now we have 2 replacement effects. We have one of them that says make the damage 2 instead, and we have one of them that says make the damage 0 instead. So where we left off with this is the part that's highlighted at the bottom, which says if the party attack manages to get through, how about the player damage done from the attack itself? And what they mean by that is like what will happen to that player damage given that we have these different replacement effects. So the conclusion we had come to last time around with this was that we dug back into tweets and rulings going way back to like Opus 2 days, because there was a question about a forward named Begamnon from back then, who had a field ability himself that said if Begamnon deals damage to your opponent, the damage becomes 0 instead. So he just had that built in, that he dealt 0 damage. And there was a tweet from back then that said if Begamnon was in a party with another forward, that the party would still deal 1 damage. So we had that as like this precedent going back all the way to almost the beginning of the game, saying that Begamnon, even though he deals 0 damage, essentially the idea was that the forward he was partied with was not restricted to dealing 0 damage, and so that forward would still basically deal damage. So I tweeted at Square Enix / Hobby Japan. It's called the Final Fantasy TCG Twitter page or Twitter account, but it's run by Hobby Japan. So I tweeted at them try to figure out kind of what the solution here would be and how that would relate to this question with the Cu Sith. And they came back and they said, oh, yeah, if the Cu Sith is cast on one of the forwards in the party of lightning and whatever she's party with, that the I think the question specifically was if it was cast on the lightning, then the damage would become 1 instead. So they didn't say it would become 0. They didn't say it would become 2. They said it would become 1 damage. So getting that answer, I myself was going, all right, how do I make sense of this with what I know to make everything not be a contradiction logic-wise? So I sent them a follow-up question, and I said, oh, so is it safe to assume when you have multiple forwards in a party that when you're determining how much damage the party deals, that you determine that by figuring out which individual member of the party deals the most damage? Now, this would cover the Begamnon situation because you would have Begamnon who deals 0 and another forward who deals 1. And so you go, oh, the individual member who's dealing the most damage is Begamnon. So you deal 1 damage there. Or in the case of this lightning, if there wasn't the Cu Sith, the lightning deals 2 points of damage normally, but then the other forward she's partied with deals 1 point of damage. So you look at which one of them would deal the most damage. Oh, okay, lightning. And that's how much damage the party deals. So I asked them if that would be a kind of a fair way to think about it, describe it. And they came back and they said, yeah, you can use that. That makes sense. Or they didn't say it makes sense, but they said, you can use that. Yes, that works. So I went, okay, cool. My little kind of logic that I came to, it worked. They confirmed it, that I wasn't just making stuff up. And we're all good. And then it occurred to me that we've had other instances with multiple replacement effects before that didn't act this way. So I sent them a follow-up question with a theoretical about 2 other forwards. One of them is the multi-element Caius that has an ability where you can make it so that he, whatever his damage is, double it until the end of the turn. And then the other is Archangel HM, who also has, I think it's for him, it's if you deal damage, he deals 2 damage instead, right? So we have 1 forward who's doubling and 1 forward who makes the damage too. And actually, maybe HM is doubling. I don't have them on the screen. But anyway, the whole point here was that when in the past, when we've had other forwards with multiple replacement effects, we didn't look individually at how much damage they would deal. We still applied all of their effects when we were figuring out how much damage the party dealt. So in the case of Caius and the Archangel, when we tried to figure out how much damage, we wouldn't have gone, okay, well, Caius would have dealt 2, Archangel would have dealt 2, so the highest among them is 2, and so you deal 2 damage. No, we actually had, since both of them double the damage, you would apply each of those. So you would take the damage, double it once, and then double it again, no matter what order you did it in. At least that's my recollection of it. I should look up Archangel there, but I know that there's multiple forwards that have the doubling thing. I know that Jack, there's a lightning Jack that can double his own damage. So I don't know, insert whatever forwards here both have the double the damage instead. You can have it so that it gets doubled twice, deals 4 damage. That's what I'm getting at. So I replied to them and I said, oh, but wait, we've had this happen before, because when we resolve this, we haven't just like used that same logic that they just told me is good to use. So the cliffhanger we left on was that we had 2 contradictory ways to handle this, and they needed to be, or they essentially are mutually exclusive. You can't have one of them work and the other one work as well. Like whatever explanation we have, the other one's not going to work. So it was, do we stick with this like precedent going back to Begamnon, and maybe we've just been doing it all wrong for years when it came to things like the Caius and Archangel situation? Or is the Caius and Archangel situation the way that we're supposed to handle it, and the Begamnon ruling from years ago was actually incorrect back then? And that was the cliffhanger we left off at, because at the point that I did episode 22, that's where I'd gotten my conversation with them. They had not gotten back to me yet, and so I left off that episode with this cliffhanger of what are you going to come back with? So after giving them that Caius and Archangel situation and wondering what do we do, they came back with this answer. They said, oh, upon rechecking, I found an error in my previous response and have corrected it. We apologize. When a party deals damage to a player, all replacement effects trigger, and the damaged player determines the order. So, if you cast Shiva on any forward during a party attack, you can reduce the total damage to 0. Of course, if Caius and Archangel HM, casting Shiva on either one will also deal 0 damage. They mentioned Shiva here because I think I used that in the example, but Shiva is just another summon that also makes the damage that a forward deals become 0. So it's functionally identical to what we're looking at with Cu Sith here. And so, yeah, so the answer given here says, oh, that whole thing about figuring out which party member deals the most damage. Yeah, never mind. It's actually not going to work. Don't do that. So that was a short-lived ruling. That lasted for, I think, less than a day from when they said, yes, you can do this to, oh, wait, no, don't do that. Or maybe it did last one day. I don't remember. But I don't know. The tombstone on that would look pretty hilarious on the born and death dates. But anyway, so the end result is that the Begamnon ruling was incorrect this whole time. And the way we've been handling things that do doubling like Caius and Archangel is correct. And that in that situation, if you had Caius and Archangel and then you cast Cu Sith or Shiva on one of them, because one of them would make the damage double and the other one makes it 0, you end up with dealing 0 damage, which works out in no matter what order you resolve those in, because either it makes the damage become 2 and then you make it become 0, or you make it become 0, and then because it's 0, it doesn't get doubled to 2 in the first place because there's nothing there to double. So anyway, that is our conclusion after all this time, after all this, after all the cliffhanger, the end of season cliffhanger there of episode 22. So if you were dying for this answer, I hope that gives you satisfaction that we have the answer, at least until they decide at some point in the future, never mind. But this seems pretty definitive at this point to me. So if this Cu Sith had been cast on either the Lightning or whoever she was partied with, the end result is that the entire party would deal 0 damage. Because either... just do deal 0 damage because you have both it and the lightning replacement effect. One of them says make it 0, one of them says make it 2, and for the same reason I just gave of the Caius and the Archangel, no matter what order you apply those in, you're going to end up with 0 damage in the end. So just a really interesting look into the back and forth that we can have with Hobby Japan on Twitter sometimes, and that sometimes when you get an answer from them, you need to ask some follow-ups because sometimes they answer, and then if you ask the follow-up, they go, oh yeah, no, that was incorrect, what we said. So yeah, that was a fun one, and I hope you enjoyed the ride there. But we're all caught up. We have a resolution. Like I said, I hope it was satisfying. And with that, we can get to actual questions from this week. So first actual question from this week is about Setzer. And the question is, whose ability is this like? Question mark, question mark, question mark. If I play another Setzer, can I get the first forwards of the previous Setzer removed, or only the 2 I target with the second Setzer? We'll come back to Len here in a second. You can see Len, but we're not going to talk about her yet. Setzer has an auto ability. It says when Setzer enters the field, choose up to 2 forwards in your break zone, remove them from the game. All right, so you choose 2 forwards and then woof, off to the remove from play zone. Then he has a field ability. It says once per turn, you can cast a card removed by Setzer's abilities at any time you could normally cast it. All right, that's interesting. So it's referencing the cards that were removed by the auto ability and saying once per turn, you can cast one of them as whenever you normally cast that forward. So if it had back attack, you can, still do that. But yeah, you can cast it. So that's cool. The question here is they're saying, what happens if I played a Setzer, I remove 2 forwards, they're in the remove from play zone. Setzer leaves for whatever reason. He's done. He's done. He's gone. I play a second Setzer. I remove 2 more forwards from the game. All right, now I have those ones removed. The question here is, can the second Setzer let you cast cards that the first Setzer removed or not? And then they're asking what ability is that like in terms of other ones, so we can kind of compare, maybe help to understand. If you know the ruling for another card that's similar, then it can help you to understand this. I'll come back to what's similar to this in a second. But the answer is he cannot cast anything removed by the previous Setzer. If you've seen any of the rules questions I've answered about the multi-element anima, then you probably have figured out this answer already, because anima is a very similar situation where it has abilities that reference things that its own abilities did, and it only references ones removed by or done by that instance of anima. And it's the same thing here with Setzer, because whenever a card says its own name in it, that's really a placeholder that just, you can translate that to mean this card, right? So think of it like it says once per turn, you can cast a card removed by this card's abilities at any time you could normally cast it. And before you get ahead of you, I can't talk. Before you get ahead of yourself on what we mean by this card, we're not just talking about physically this card. It's this particular instance of this card. Because as a reminder, every time a card changes zones, it is a new instance of that card, and it retains some information about like where it came from and when, but it's a new instance of the card. So even if you had like if you Renault with the same Setzer, right? It's the same physical card. It goes removed from play zone, and it comes back. It's the same physical card, but the game considers it two different instances of Setzer that are distinct and unique from one another. So it's referring to this card, but really, if we really like complicate it, put a little asterisk on it, it's this card, asterisk, and at the bottom of the footnote it says this instance of this card, right? So when it says you can cast a card removed by Setzer's abilities, it's talking about this particular instance of this particular Setzer. If they wanted to do something like you can cast a card removed by your card name Setzer's abilities, they could have done that if they wanted it to be all-inclusive, this kind of umbrella that covered anything that any Setzer you've ever used removed from the game. But they didn't do that here, and it would get a little bit more messy rules-wise. But yeah, so the short version to all that is to say that Setzer can only let you cast things that this particular Setzer removed. So if you had those two from before, you can't cast those two, but the two that this one is removed, Setzer can cast those two. And then if this Setzer left the field and you had a third one enter, well, all four of these are out. They weren't removed by that particular Setzer, this third iteration that we're talking about. So doesn't work. So the question about being like whose ability is this like? Well, it's like anima, which I started off by mentioning. It's like anima in the sense that it's got an ability that references cards removed by its own ability, and that's talking about the instance. What it is not like is the Len here, which is why I've got her side by side just to give the contrast, because she has two abilities that let you cast things that she removed. The first one lets you remove the top card of your deck from the game, and then it says you can cast it at any time you could normally cast it this turn. Now the difference there is that the auto ability itself is giving you the means by which you can cast it, because part of resolving this effect says you can cast it at any time you could normally cast it this turn. So it creates this ongoing effect that allows you to cast it for the rest of the turn. So the vehicle by which we're casting the card that was removed is the auto ability itself, as opposed to Setzer. The auto ability itself doesn't do anything to let you cast it. It's his field ability that lets you cast the cards removed by him. So that's where they differ. Similarly, Len has the second ability here that chooses something to break zone removed from the game, and then it says during this game you can cast it at any time you can normally cast it. Similar concept there. It's resolving that effect creates the ongoing effect that allows you to cast the card removed by it, and at that point it doesn't matter what happens to Len. For the rest of the game, she could have left the field, she could have been removed from play, she could have wandered off the table entirely, which is its own problem, but she could be completely gone and you still get to cast that card. So that's the type of wording we would have needed with Setzer to like allow it to keep getting cast. But even just tying it into saying that it's, you've got a field ability that lets him cast cards removed, we're talking about that particular instance. So it's very restrictive, which is part of the reason probably we don't see this card get used too much. But yeah, so I hope that answers the question as thoroughly as it should be there. Next up. Oh, we got a question about lightning. Lightning returns again. There are two guarantees in life. The first is death, and the second is rules questions about lightning. So this time, the question says, okay, So I thought about this, went digging in Discords and Judge Jared, and couldn't seem to find anything. So attack with lightning, do the party attack with a card from hand. Opponent blocks and declare all damage to the lightning, killing it, but the other card lives. Since lightning is dead and her auto/field ability cannot resolve, does that card that was not killed stay on the field, or does it still go back to my hand? This goes back to the fact that her ability is just very complicated and very novel in most of what it does. So to recap, her ability here, it lets you play a category 13 forward of cost 6 or less onto the field. It enters dull, it enters partied with her and attacking. And then at the end of it, they sneak in this thing. It says, at the end of the turn, return it to its owner's hand, it being the forward that you played off the ability. So their question here is that we've gone as far as lightning attacked. We played the forward. It came in, they're partied, they did whatever happened at that point. And then sometime later during the turn, after it's been played, they blocked. That's what they said, right? So not just sometime, right afterward, they got blocked as a party. And the blocker dealt damage to lightning enough that it broke lightning. So the party was blocked, damage was blocked, or at least player damage was. Lightning's gone now. We still have the forward that was played. It survived the party attack. And they want to know what happens now, because lightning does say at the end of the turn, return to its owner's hand, but lightning's no longer on the field. So is that text still active? They do say like lightning is dead and her auto/field ability cannot resolve. I do want to clarify, this here is an auto ability, not a field ability. So just so that we're clear about what we're talking about, this at the end of the turn thing, it is not a field ability. And to understand what the reasoning is behind this, we want to be aware that this part of the auto, which it's all one thing, these last 4 lines of text on her card, they are all one auto ability. But part of what it does is it creates a delayed auto ability. And so a delayed auto ability is, I mean, it's similar to a regular auto ability, except the difference is that it gets generated and then doesn't trigger immediately. So like it gets created, right? Generated. It's out there, but its trigger is not right now. It's not immediate. It's not like a when you do so, where as soon as it gets created, it's like, oh, we did so. So haha, here we go. It's delayed in that it has a trigger, and that trigger is not happening right now, and at some point later it will trigger. So it's just kind of floating out there like an ongoing effect, basically, waiting for the trigger event to happen. And in this case, the trigger event is at the end of the turn. That's when it happens. So the thing to understand here is that this delayed auto ability that was generated by her auto ability, the whole big paragraph there, it was generated and created when we resolved that auto ability. Even though we're not returning the forward right now, this delayed auto ability was generated at the point in time that we were resolving, playing the forward, partied, and all that stuff. So it's out there floating, and it's independent of lightning at that point. Just like the rest of the ability was independent of lightning for the most part. And there's kind of weirdness with if she left the field before you played the card. We're not going to get into that. But it's independent of her. So what that means is we still have this delayed auto ability out there waiting to trigger, waiting for the end of the turn. And it doesn't really matter what happens to lightning. It doesn't matter if she leaves the field. It doesn't matter if she loses her abilities before the end of the turn. None of those things matter. So what will happen is that even though she's gone, we'll go to the end of the turn, and as soon as we start the beginning of the end phase, we will trigger this auto ability, and then the forward still gets returned there. So yeah, the end result is that the forward that was not broken is still going to go back to the hand, just because that delayed auto ability it doesn't really care what happened to lightning. It's its own entity at that point. And so, yeah, that's what happens there. And the thing is, we're talking about lightning, like I said, because she's an endless source of questions. And so because she's an endless source of questions, that does mean that it is now shameless plug time. It's shameless plug time. You probably saw that coming as soon as I said I had a question about lightning. Maybe you were expecting one when I went back to the recap and that was about lightning. But no, right now it's shameless plug time because I did a video all about lightning. It's right there. I mean, at least a picture of it's right there. You can't click on that, but that's right there. So you can go to my YouTube page. You're on my YouTube page right now, but you can go to the page itself, find that video, and watch it to learn all about lightning and all of her weirdness of her abilities there. Similarly, since I'm already in shameless plug time anyway, I'm just going to double up on this. I don't have the picture for it, but imagine the picture down there that I had this exact question in the first episode of Judge. A question about lightning and whether or not the card stayed on the field. I'm fairly certain it was in the episode 1 of that there. So you can see me talk about that there the same way that I just did right now. But since we did just cover the answer to this right now, this video is good just for understanding everything broadly about lightning and about a lot of the oddness with her ability. So yes, you have been shamelessly plugged, or we have collectively shamelessly plugged, however you want to look at it. But thank you for being along for the journey. Anyway, next question. So this one, the question is, if you have Minwu on the field and exactly 7 FFBE titled characters in the break zone, with Astrius being one of them, using Minwu's ability to cast a card from the break zone for free, can you cast Astrius since you technically have 7 FFBE in the break zone? I love this question, and I will come back to why I love this question in a moment, but let's understand what the question is. So Minwu has an action ability. It says choose 1 card in your break zone. During this turn, you can cast it at any time you could normally cast it, as long as you have no cards in hand. You can only use this ability during your turn and only once per turn. Okay, so she's allowing us to cast a card from our break zone. And everything about it and how we're casting it is identical to like casting it from our hand. It's just that we're giving this, we are being given permission to cast it from the break zone. All right, so that's how we're casting this. Now, Astrius himself has a field ability. It says, if you have a total of 7 or more category FFBE cards in your break zone and or category FFBE cards you own removed from the game, the cost required to cast Astrius is reduced by 5. Well, that's neat, because his cost is 5. You can potentially have his cost reduced by 5, and this is not one of those cards that has in parentheses, it cannot become 0. So, if you have 7 or more FFBE cards, either in the break zone and or removed from the game, his cost becomes 0. You can cast him for free. So, the person who's asking this question, they very much want to activate Minwu's ability, choose Astrius, and then be able to cast Astrius for a grand total of 0 CP. And they're like going, can I do this? And the reason why they're asking this is because the requirement of Astrius is you have to have 7 cards either in your break zone or removed from the game, some combination there. And they're saying, hey, I have exactly 7, including the Astrius, right? So we have Astrius plus 6. And they're wondering if we can still cast them for 0, because if you think about it, it's like, okay, well, if I'm casting Astrius, is Astrius no longer in the break zone at that point? And so now I don't have 7 because he was the 7th. Like, how does this work? So this is why I love this question. The reason why I love this question is because it's the perfect opportunity to highlight one of my pet peeves, which is understanding the proper way that we are supposed to cast and pay for cards in this game. Because the vast majority of people, they're used to playing other games where you generate the resource first and then you spend the resource. And that's the opposite of how FFTCG is designed. In FFTCG, the order of events is that you declare what you're casting, you determine the cost of the card, you pay the cost of the card, and then it enters whatever zone it's going to. If it's character, it's entering the field. If it's a summon, it's entering the stack. So you're declaring, determining, paying, playing, or moving, however you want to think of it. So that's the 4 steps there. So the thing is, because most people end up putting the card out and then, they end up doing all the payment first and then putting the card out, they might think that because they had to declare things, they might be like, oh, but the character's on the field now, so it's not in there, and I have to determine the cost, but there's only 6 in there now, so I have to pay 5, don't I? But the thing to remember here is that when we're declaring what card we're casting, the card has not entered the field yet. That's the last part of the steps. The 4 steps is actually having the card enter the field. So although we declare what we're doing, that card is still in the zone that it was in before until we finish the casting process. Then it moves to the zone it's going to, the field or the stack generally. So because of that, what's happening here is that if we follow that process, we're going to reveal that we're casting Astrius. We see I'm casting Astrius. At this point in time, Astrius is still in the break zone. We've declared him, but he is not yet like on the field. We're not putting him out there. What we're doing is we're just saying that we're declaring that we're casting him. Now, step 2, determine the cost. At this point, we determine the cost by looking at anything that would affect his cost, such as his field ability. At this point in time, there's still 7 cards, exactly 7, in the break zone or removed from the game. So we determined that his cost is 0. Then we pay the cost. We go, haha, I paid 0. Look at me, I'm paying 0. Then, final step. Now, we play the card to the field. So at that point, now he's moving away from the break zone, but we've already locked in the cost and paid for it, so it doesn't really matter at that point. So yeah, the good news is that you do get to still cast him for 0, which is great if you're the Astrius / Minwu player. But yeah, some people might get kind of caught up in that because of like thinking about what the process is versus what it's supposed to be. Or in all fairness, they might get caught up because if they are playing it the proper way, they might think, oh, well, I have to move it out first to declare and then pay for it. And then they think, oh, well, it's not in the break zone anymore. So, all right, all fairness, it's not necessarily all about my pet peeve, because even if you do it properly, you can still get caught up on this. But I love any opportunity to talk about my pet peeve. So at least there's that. But yeah, just remember that the card is always, it's still in the zone that it was in until you finish the casting process, then it moves. Which is part of the reason why it's really important when you have like a summon or something that chooses something as part of its process, that you can't choose something that you're using to pay for it, because you have to do all that process there. Oh, actually, now that I think of it, the thing about summons is they get put on the stack first, I guess, before you. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to dive into that right now. I'm getting into my own little side lane here. Maybe I should come back to it later in a different video. Anyway, important to take away from this is those 4 steps that I mentioned. Declare, determine, pay, move. That's your process there. So Astrius gets to be 0. Huzzah. All right, next question up here says, bit of a complicated question. I have Tros on the field. Opponent has Sid WOFF. They attack, hitting an EX Leviathan into damage. If I use the X to bounce one of their forwards, what will happen first? Tros's draw or Sid's discard? Now, this is a good question that gets into the timing of auto abilities and when things resolve and that versus when they trigger. So let's set the stage here based off of their explanation. So they're saying that they have the Tros and the opponent has Sid. The opponent attacked, so it's their turn, their opponent's turn. They attacked, they hit an X Leviathan, and then the person who's asking the question, who's the non-turn player, they decide to use the Leviathan. It returns it forward to the opponent's hand, and they want to know what happens here as far as the timing. Now, just as a reminder, the timing here, or the autos we're talking about, for Sid, he just says when your opponent uses an X burst, your opponent randomly discards 1 card. So the trigger event here is using an X burst. And then Tros, the auto ability is when a forward opponent controls is returned from the field to its owner's hand, draw 1 card. So the trigger event there is a forward the opponent controls returning to the owner's hand. So the thing to remember, the golden rule to remember with autos, is they always trigger immediately when their trigger event happens, but they have to wait until someone gains priority to be put on the stack. So they trigger immediately. They don't go on the stack immediately. So when the player attacked, they hit the Leviathan, and the non-turn player said, yes, I'm going to use this X burst. And as soon as they say, I'm going to use it, the Sid triggers. right? They've used the X bursts, right? And it triggers, but it's got to wait. And then we resolve the Leviathan. The Leviathan returns the forward to hand, and now the Tros triggers because that's its trigger event, is the forward returning to hand. So there's a discrepancy in terms of the timing of when they triggered. But here's the thing: when they trigger, like I said, they have to wait until somebody gains priority. So although I'm going to use a metaphor here, I usually try to avoid getting too crazy with metaphors because you can get lost in the weeds with this. I'm going to keep it simple though. Just think of it as that when an auto triggers, it has to go into the waiting room, essentially. It's got to chill in the waiting room until somebody gains priority, and then now whatever autos are in the waiting room get put onto the stack. So we had the Sid, it triggered first, it went into the waiting room. And then we had the Tros, it triggered afterward, it went into the waiting room. Both autos chilling there in the waiting room. And then after we resolved the X burst, now the turn player gains priority. And at this point, before they can do anything, we're about to gain priority. Now we put autos that have triggered onto the stack. So now we look at the waiting room, and the waiting room has 2 autos in it. But the thing is, we don't, like, the game doesn't know, or doesn't care, at least, when they triggered. All it cares about is that there's 2 in the waiting room right now. So for the purposes of determining the order, all that matters is that they are both in there at the point in time where we're trying to put them onto the stack. So essentially, everything that happens between one priority window and the next priority window, all of that, doesn't matter at what point between those two something triggered, they're all going to be equal in the eyes of when they go on the stack, because it doesn't matter if they triggered immediately after that previous priority window or immediately before the next priority window. All that matters is that when we go to the next priority window, we're going to look at what's currently in the waiting room. And if they're in the waiting room, they all have equal standing, as it were. So when we do that, we follow the general rule that first the turn player puts their auto abilities on the stack in whatever order they want, if they have multiple, and then the non-turn player puts their auto abilities on the stack afterward in whatever order they want, if they had multiple. So what would happen here is that the Sid is the turn player's auto, so it would be put on the stack, and then the Tros would be put on the stack. And this is relevant, of course, because when we resolve, that means the Tros is going to draw you a card, and then after that, the Sid is going to cause the random discard. So that random discard is going to include the card in hand, which this could be super relevant if the player had no cards in their hand in the first place, right? If they had no cards in their hand, but now the Tros gave them a card, and now the Sid makes them discard it, that's a big difference versus if it was the other way around, where the Sid goes, oh, you have to discard. Oh, I don't have anything to discard, and now we're going to resolve Tros, and now I get to draw a card. Right, you'd have a very different result depending on the order there, which is why this question is so kind of important and relevant here. So, yeah, that's the thing, is that we always go with, when there's multiple in our waiting room, turn player puts theirs on first, then non-turn player. And like I said, between 2 priority windows, we might have multiple actions that resolved, and those multiple actions at different points could have caused different autos to trigger. But they are all equal when it comes to when they go onto the stack. We're not actually going to track that this one happened just, right at the beginning of this time between priority windows, and this one triggered later, and this one was right at the end. Doesn't matter. They are all in the eyes of who gets standing, priority, whatever. It's all the same, just because they were whoever was there since the last time that we checked, essentially is what we're looking at. So I know that's kind of complicated, but just to help you understand broadly beyond just this interaction, just anytime we have multiple things triggering, even though they're going to be at slightly different times. All right, so that's the last actual question for this week, but I have one more thing that I need to revisit that's very important here. And so it's not a current question, but we're actually going to go way back here, because I need to correct the record on something. I need to correct the record on something that I made a mistake on, because I try to be as accurate as I can with everything, because I know that if you're watching and you trust my analysis on things and that I know what I'm doing, then I definitely feel the importance of making sure that I'm correct, but also the importance of making sure that I bring up when I made a mistake, so that I can again literally just correct the record and also just show that everybody makes mistakes, right? Doesn't matter how long you've been doing this or how confident you feel or how deeply into the rules you've dove before, you can still make mistakes. So this mistake goes back all the way to episode 10, a whopping 14 episodes ago. So episode 10 of Rules Roundup. I had a question at the time. It was asking about how we mark things down on match slips. And the question at the time was, what happens if a player received more points of damage than at the same time than would put them at 7 to lose? And so I have a Shikari X over here, partially because she's a great example, and also because she's helping me out here with her little kind of shrug, because that's kind of how I'm feeling with like okay, time to talk about how I messed something up. All right, let's have this discussion. She's got this ability that can cause 3 points of damage simultaneously, right? It doesn't really matter what causes it, but at the end it says Shikari X deals your opponent 3 points of damage. So when that happens, you resolve all 3 points of damage. You can't stop in the middle of that. There's no rule processes check in the middle of that to see that you hit 7. So if they were at, say, 6 points of damage, and then Shikari X resolves, you're going to do points of damage 7, 8, and 9, and then you'd be at 9 damage. So the question at the time was, okay, what would we write down for that on the match slip? You're supposed to write down damage received. Do we write down 7 because you lost, or do you write down 9 because you actually technically received 9? Like, what gives? What do we do here? And at the time, I answered it by saying that no, you write down the actual damage received. So if you received 9 points of damage, you needed to write down the correct amount of points of damage because it's important to be accurate, and that's the way you're supposed to do it. And that's what I said at the time. And people were like, oh, I had never heard about that. That's interesting. And then at some point after that, I forget how long after that it was. At some point after that, I was looking at the floor rules for some reason or another. And the thing about the floor rules is that most of the entries are in black, but whenever they update something, they put the updates in red so you can easily look at it and see which things were changed since the last one. And so I was looking through the floor rules, and I see this entry that I've highlighted here. And the entry says, damage points inflicted in excess of those required to win a match. As a general rule, this will be 7 for a constructed match and 6 for a limited match, are not counted. So that's literally saying the opposite of what I said as the answer in my video. I looked at that and I went, oh no. And I was like, how long has this been like this way? Like, how long have I not known that this, was what we're supposed to do? Now it's in red, which means it was from the most recent update. So I felt like slightly vindicated for a second, like, oh, this is a recent update. Like, I just somehow didn't see it. I didn't realize that they changed that. But no, the little thing at the top says, oh, this is the most recent edition as of February of 2024. So wah wah. It had been more than a year that it had been updated. So that's either me not being aware for a year or me forgetting how it changed. I don't know, but I don't get to use the excuse of like, oh, it was only changed a couple months ago and it's a new thing. I should have known better because it had been that way for over a year. Now, so yeah, so I saw that and I went, oh, geez. Okay. Well, I need to correct this. And I have wanted to correct it for a long time. And I just honestly, just full transparency, I just didn't get around to being able to sneak it into one of these rules roundups. And it's been in the back of my mind for literally months at this point that I needed to do it. I couldn't decide, I guess, if I wanted to do a separate video to call it out or if I wanted to include it in a rules roundup. I just was very indecisive. Things were busy in the summer and all that. So yeah, those are all excuses. But essentially, I dropped the ball and wanted to update this a lot sooner than I did, which is right now. But yeah, unfortunately, I was incorrect about that, and I wanted to get to it, and I didn't. And now, the reason for coming back to it now is a story actually from the Last Chance Qualifier. And if you've watched episode 2 of Judge, then you know this story already, and you can probably just skip at this point unless you would really want to hear the story again, because I told it in that episode. But just in case you didn't watch it, or in case it didn't stick, I'm going to go over that story again right here because it's relevant to all this. and just relevant to the fact that everybody can make mistakes. To be honest, it's just a good story in my opinion. So, what happened was, having known this, because at some point a couple months or more ago, I knew that I'd screwed up. I knew that this had been changed, so I was aware of it. We had a situation at the Last Chance Qualifier where a player was using the lightning that we talked about twice already in this video. And so they were at 6 points of damage, and the lightning came in and attacked, and they dealt the 2 damage from it. And so they lost, having taken 8 points of damage. So there was a judge call. Judge call wasn't actually me initially. It was another one of the judges. And they're asking, okay, what do we write down on the match slip? They weren't sure. So they, asked me, like, hey, do you know what we're supposed to do with this? And I kind of internally laughed a little bit, because I knew exactly what we needed to do with that, because I had been internally shamed about this for a couple months at that point. And so I'm like, oh yes, I know what happens. So I explained to the players that no, you need to write down, even though you took 8 points of damage, you only write down 7, because that's what you're supposed to do, is you only write down the necessary amount of damage to win/lose, and you leave it at that. And the player, they wanted to appeal my ruling on that. They're like, I don't think that's correct. I want to appeal it. The amusing thing on top of this is, I think it was the player who received the 8 points of damage was the one appealing it. Okay. So they appealed and went, okay, I will talk to Kageyama-san and we'll bring it up. So I go up to Kageyama-san and I explain the situation, because it's being appealed. And so it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong. We're going to the head judge, which was him. And I explain it. And I'm just like, what are we supposed to write down? Are we supposed to write down the 8 that was received, or are we supposed to write down the 7? And so he, goes through, thinks about it, and he goes, oh, write down 8, write down the actual damage that was dealt, which came as a shock to me, I'll tell you, knowing that I had felt personally burned by my own mistake on this. That he said he was reversing essentially again and saying, oh no, write down the actual points of damage. And this is Kageyama-san, as I've been jokingly calling him the voice of God, right? Because usually when we get rules answers on Twitter and stuff, it's usually Kageyama-san. So since he answered with that, I was like, who am I to argue with Kageyama? Yeah, if he says that, especially the normal way that the things work with judging is the head judge's ruling is final at that point. And it doesn't matter if the head judge is correct or not. If they make the ruling, we're done at that point. So I was about to let it go, because I also wasn't about to argue with him, because although I knew it was in the floor rules, I was like, I'm not gonna pull up on my phone the floor rules and try to show it to him, and then have the potential language barrier there and all that. And I'm just like, I'm gonna respect the head judge and leave it at that. And I think I told the other judge at the time, okay, yeah, tell him you're writing down the 8 or whatever. And then at that point in time, I noticed I'd forgotten that Square Enix, for the LCQ and Nats, they had printed up copies of the floor rules right next to us on the table where Kageyama-san was sitting. I'm like, oh, we have printed up copies. That's better than just pulling it up on my phone and arguing about it. So I'm like, all right, I know that this is supposed to be correct, so I just want to bring it up to him, not to try to say, hey, you're wrong, but just to be like, hey, am I misunderstanding, or is there is there an intention to change this or something? I'm just trying to make sure we get the right call, right? And then also for my own understanding. So I bring up the floor rules and I bother him again, and I say, here's the reason why I was asking if it was this. Although actually the real reason, I guess, was that it had been appealed, and so it didn't really matter what I thought. But I think I just show him that here's why I think it should be the other way. And I kind of point to this section that's down here below, and the whole thing. And I'm using my pen, and I'm underlining the important words in the sentence, because there's the unnecessary stuff in parentheses or whatever. So I'm just damage points inflicted in excess, and then the part at the end says are not counted, right? And I'm just making my point there. And Kageyama sounds looking and reading, and also working through the translator that we have there and everything, and just kind of absorbing the knowledge there. And thinks about it, and then he looks at me and he's like, oh yeah, no, write 7 then, write 7. So Kageyama-san just reverses his own ruling in that moment in time. And then we had to go back to the table and tell them, no, actually, I'm sorry. I know we just told you to write down 8, but actually, no, it is going to be 7. Final answer. It's going to be 7. And so I tell this story again because I want to correct the record, but also it's just really amusing to me that even in the moment at Nats with who I'm calling the voice of God there, even Kageyama-san got it incorrect, right? And he did say to me when, after telling me, yes, say that it's supposed to be 7 or it's going to make it 7. He said something along the lines of but make it 7, but I'm going to have to talk to the team about that. I'm going to have to go back and discuss it with the team. He didn't give me more clarification. I'm not sure if he's going to discuss it with them because maybe this doesn't match up with their intention, or he just saw it and went oh, we screwed up. We shouldn't have made it that way, but we're going to we're going to do it now because that's what it says. I'm not really sure. And there may be no follow-up ever on this. Maybe he's never going to discuss it with the team and this is what it is. But it's really amusing to me. Like I said, it's an interesting story, but also just kind of getting to the understanding of the whole process of doing the rules and getting the rules right and trying to navigate through all this, especially when things change. Because obviously they made this change at the beginning of 2024. So they very much had, for whatever reason, they came into it and went, you know what? Right now we're writing down the amount of damage that's actually received, and we need to change that. Somebody at some point, we need to change that, and we need to put it in, and it did get changed. But I don't know the reasons behind why, or if it's going to stay that way. It'd be kind of funny if it just popped out in the next update. You're JK. Just go ahead and write down what you received. But yeah, so that's the story there with that. With an unofficial shameless plug time for episode 2 of Judge, because that's where I went over this. And so having gone over that in that video, I knew for sure I really need to do a proper kind of mea culpa about this. And so I apologize it took this long. Like I said, I gave the answer back in episode 10 several months ago, and I screwed up, but I'm trying to correct the record now. So now we know, I know, and you know, and Kageyama-san knows that you only write down the amount of damage required to win. Doesn't matter how much you took. If you had the Garnet promo out and you took 20 points of damage before you lost, you still only write down 7. It is how it is. Anyway, that's the end of today. Like I said, we have plenty to talk about. Even though there's only 4 actual rules questions, between covering the cliffhanger and then updating the answer for this one that I messed up, lots to talk about. So I hope you enjoyed all of that. If you want to find me in various places, you can see down below here that on YouTube, which is where you're watching me, I'm at YouTube and it's at Judge Jared is my channel on YouTube. On Facebook, my Facebook page is Judge Jared, so you can find me at facebook.com/Judge Jared. On Twitter, if you want to talk to me, well, not talk to me, if you want to see me sending tweets at Hobby Japan and trying to get interesting answers and going back and forth with them, or just follow me in general, then I am at Judge Jared FFTCG on Twitter. And if you want to ask me questions directly or mention anything to me directly at all, give me feedback or tell me I'm wrong or something, I don't know. Whatever you feel like telling me on Discord, my DMs are open and my username is Judge Jared over Discord. Once again, you can join us for the whole conversation about rules stuff in the Discord over there. That Discord is not all about rules, by the way. It's just one little subsection. So you can just join in for chatting about anything about FFTCG, about deck building, or talking about the events, various things. It's an awesome place to be. If you're playing FFTCG, you should be in that server. That's my pitch there. Yeah, that's all the different places you can find me. Go ahead, and if you liked what you saw here, like it. If you didn't like what you saw here, I guess you can hit the dislike. Make me a little bit sad. I'm trying my best. But I don't know. Go with your heart if you liked it or disliked it in your heart. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, because that always is awesome. I literally just hit 250 subscribers, which is awesome. I am so jazzed about hitting 250. That's super exciting. It's been just over 6 months now since I first put out the priming video, which is my first rules video that I did, and at 250 subscribers, and that's just a great little accomplishment. So to all 250 of you that are subscribed, thank you so much. You are all awesome. If you are not one of the 250 who has subscribed, there's nothing stopping you. All you gotta do is click that button. You get to join the rest of us and be part of. You know, it feels pretentious to me to have like a name for the people who are subscribed, like to be like my followers or something. But I'm a sucker for things being thematic, so I don't know. I'm gonna say that the 250 subscribers are the jury. So you can join the jury of 250 by subscribing to me there, and yeah, just we're gonna keep pushing to 300, so you can be part of that push to 300. You can do it too. I've been rambling, so I should stop rambling. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being a part of all of this, and for watching this far, both. Yeah, I'm Judge Jared. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, court is adjourned.